My name is Elspeth Vance, and I am 30 years old. For most of my life, I was defined not by who I was, but by what I was not. I was not loud. I was not dramatic. I was not the center of attention. In the blazing constellation of my family, I was the dark matter, the unseen space between the stars. I spent 3 decades in their orbit, a silent observer taking notes on a life I felt I was watching from behind a one-way mirror. And then, I wrote it all down. I took their dramas, their casual cruelties, their magnificent obliviousness, and I forged it into a story. I never expected that this quiet act of self-preservation would become a literary earthquake, or that the sweetest and most terrifying moment of my life would be sitting in my mother's living room, listening to her and her friends dissect the masterpiece of my pain, completely unaware that the ghost they were analyzing was passing them the cucumber sandwiches. Before I tell you how I turned a lifetime of invisibility into the kind of truth that forces everyone to finally see, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like the quiet one in a room full of noise, go ahead and hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. And for all the other observers and storytellers out there, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for those of us who see things others miss. To understand the silence, you have to understand the noise that created it. The Vance family operated at a constant fever-pitch volume. My mother, Eleanor, was the conductor of our chaotic orchestra. She was a woman who didn't just enter a room. She made an entrance, her voice preceding her like a herald, her gestures grand and theatrical. Life for my mother was a performance, and she was its eternal leading lady. My father, Richard, was her devoted, if perpetually exhausted, stage manager. His primary role was to smooth feathers, de-escalate the conflicts my mother and sister ignited, and maintain a fragile, surface-level peace. His mantra was a weary, now, let's all just calm down, a phrase that solved nothing but allowed him to retreat back into the wings. And then there was Cassandra, my older sister. If my mother was the leading lady, Cassandra was the ingenue, the dazzling starlet, destined for greatness. She was beautiful, vibrant, and possessed a talent for drama that rivaled Mom's. Everything about Cassandra was an event. Her triumphs were ticker-tape parades, and her minor inconveniences were 5-act tragedies. In this solar system, I was Pluto, distant, cold, and not entirely sure I was still classified as part of the family plan. I wasn't neglected in the material sense. I had clothes, food, a roof over my head. The neglect was more insidious. It was a neglect of the self, of the spirit. I was simply overlooked, an afterthought, a piece of furniture that was so familiar no one bothered to notice it anymore. Family dinners were not meals. They were showcases. I remember one evening when I was about 17. I had just received a letter confirming I'd won a statewide essay competition, a significant honor that came with a small scholarship. I was buzzing with a rare, fizzy excitement. I waited for a lull in the conversation, a tiny crack of silence I could slip my news into. The current topic was Cassandra's catastrophic breakup with a boy named Julian, which had happened a full 6 months prior, but was still getting regular airtime. And the nerve of him, Cassandra was saying, spearing a single pea with the force of a harpoon, to show up at the mall with her. It was a deliberate act of psychological warfare, Mom. Of course it was, darling, Eleanor cooed, her eyes flashing with righteous indignation on her daughter's behalf. He's a sociopath. I've always said so. I don't know, Cass, my father ventured, cautiously. Maybe he just lives near the mall. This was met with a synchronized glare from both my mother and sister that could have curdled milk. He immediately folded. Or maybe it was the psychological warfare thing. Almost certainly, in fact. He retreated into his mashed potatoes. I saw my opening, small as it was. Speaking of things that happened, I started, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. I got some good news today. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to me, but they were vacant, like the lenses of cameras that were momentarily panning past an uninteresting part of the set. I won the Pendleton Prize for my essay on the themes of isolation in American poetry. There was a beat of silence. My mother blinked, a slow, regal gesture. Oh, she said. The word was a pebble dropped into a vast, empty canyon. That's nice, dear. The Pendleton Prize. Is that a local thing? It's statewide, Mom, I said, my excitement already starting to deflate. It comes with $500 for college. Cassandra let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't mean, not exactly. It was worse. It was dismissive. $500? Elspeth, that's cute. My last phone bill was almost that much. She turned back to my mother. Anyway, as I was saying, the trauma of seeing him has completely thrown off my prep for the SATs. I'm probably going to fail now, and it will be all his fault. And just like that, the spotlight swiveled back to her. My father patted my hand, a gesture meant to be comforting but felt like a pat on the head of a dog. That's wonderful news, Ellie, he murmured, his eyes already drifting back to the main stage. A real accomplishment. Just, maybe don't mention the money to your sister right now. She's very stressed. My tiny victory, my moment of pride, was not just ignored. It was deemed an inconvenience to the larger, more important drama at hand. I remember looking at my winning essay, sitting in my bag by the door. The topic, the themes of isolation in American poetry, suddenly felt less like an academic subject and more like a biography. I spent the rest of the dinner in my usual role, a silent, attentive audience member for a play I was never cast in. This dynamic was cemented early, a pattern set in the soft concrete of childhood. I was 8 years old, and our elementary school was putting on a production of The Wizard of Oz. Cassandra, naturally, was cast as Dorothy. She was born for the role, with a flair for the dramatic and a powerful singing voice that could rattle the windows of the gymnasium. I, on the other hand, was cast as a munchkin, not even a specific munchkin, from the Lullaby League or the Lollipop Guild. I was Munchkin number 3, a background role, with a single crucial line. After Dorothy's house lands, I was the one who was supposed to run to the front of the stage and cry out, "The witch is dead." It was the line that propelled the entire story forward, small, but vital. For weeks, our house was consumed by Cassandra's preparations. My mother sewed her a gingham dress that was a perfect replica of Judy Garland's, and my father spent hours coaching her on how to convey the right blend of bewilderment and pluck. My own rehearsals were conducted in my bedroom, in front of a mirror. "The witch is dead," I'd whisper, then try it louder. "The witch is dead." I practiced it with urgency, with relief, with a hint of fear. I was determined to be the best Munchkin number 3 the school had ever seen. The night of the play arrived. The gymnasium buzzed with the energy of parents armed with camcorders. My father had his, a large, clunky device perched on his shoulder. "I'll get both my girls," he promised, winking at me. "You'll be a star, Ellie." The play began. Cassandra was magnificent. She sang over the rainbow with a pathos that was frankly alarming in a 10-year-old. The audience was captivated. I watched from the wings, my heart thumping in my little blue munchkin costume. Then came my scene. The tornado, the crash of the house. The stage went dark, and then the lights came up on the painted backdrop of Munchkinland. This was it. I took a deep breath, ran to my mark at the center of the stage, opened my mouth, and with all the force my 8-year-old lungs could muster, I shouted, "The witch is dead." The line landed perfectly. It was clear, loud, and full of conviction. A wave of pride washed over me. I had done it. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I asked my dad, "Did you get it? Did you get my line on camera?" He had a strange look on his face. He fiddled with the camcorder, rewinding the tape. "Let's have a look," he said, his voice a little too breezy. We watched the footage. There was Cassandra, being brilliant. There she was again, singing her heart out. The tornado sequence was a dizzying blur of my father's shaky hand. Then the tape cut to static. It started again with the Munchkins all singing Ding Dong. "The witch is dead." My big moment completely gone. "Oh, for goodness sake, Richard," my mother said, walking into the room. "I told you to change the tape during the tornado." My father looked flustered. I thought it had more time. I was so focused on getting Cassie's reaction when the house landed. He turned to me, his face a mask of strained apology. I'm so sorry, sweetie. But you were wonderful. I saw you. You were the best Munchkin. But he hadn't seen me. Not really. He had been looking at Cassandra, waiting for her reaction. My mother had been thinking about the logistics of filming Cassandra. My one line, my one moment to be part of the story, had been erased, lost in the technical difficulties of documenting Cassandra's stardom. I didn't cry. I just nodded, a familiar feeling of cold resignation settling in my chest. It was the first time I understood that in my family's movie, I wasn't just a background actor. I was the part that got left on the cutting room floor. This pattern of casual erasure continued into my early adulthood. My college graduation should have been a landmark event. I was the first person in our immediate family to get a 4-year degree, graduating with honors in English literature from a respectable university. I had sent the invitations weeks in advance, highlighted the time of the ceremony, and even included a map of the campus. The day itself was a sweltering afternoon in late May. I stood in a sea of black robes, my palms sweating, scanning the vast crowd for my family. The ceremony began. Names were called. I watched my friends walk across the stage, their families erupting in cheers and air horns. My name was called, Elspeth Vance, magna cum laude. A smattering of polite applause came from the general audience. I searched the faces again. Nothing. They weren't there. I collected my diploma in a daze of disappointment and walked back to my seat, the scroll feeling like a lead weight in my hand. It wasn't until the ceremony was nearly over, during the dean's closing remarks, that I saw them struggling to find seats in the very back row. My mother was fanning herself dramatically with the program. My father looked apologetic, and Cassandra was texting furiously on her phone. The dinner afterward was meant to be my celebration, at a nice Italian restaurant I had picked out. But from the moment we sat down, the focus shifted. The traffic was just unbearable, my mother announced to the table, and the parking situation was a nightmare. Honestly, you'd think a university of this size would be better organized. We missed you walking, my father said, reaching for my hand. There was genuine regret in his eyes, which almost made it worse. I'm so sorry, Ellie. We heard your name called just as we were coming in. Cassandra didn't even look up from her phone. You only walk for like 5 seconds. It's not a big deal. You still got the thing, right? She said, gesturing vaguely at the diploma I'd placed on the table. Before I could answer, she put her phone down with a loud clatter and clapped her hands together. Okay, so, since we're all here, she began, her voice taking on the tone of a royal proclamation. I have some news. She held up her left hand, where a large, glittering diamond now sat on her ring finger. Brian proposed. The table erupted. My mother shrieked with delight. My father beamed, all memory of his tardiness forgotten. Cassandra, that's wonderful news, he boomed. The next hour was a whirlwind of wedding talk. Dates, venues, dress styles, and a detailed, dramatic reenactment of the proposal. My graduation, the very reason we were all sitting there, evaporated. It was a footnote in the grand unfolding story of Cassandra's engagement. At one point, my mother, flushed with excitement, picked up my diploma. Oh, this is lovely, dear, she said, using it to fan her face. We're so proud. But her eyes were on Cassandra, and she was already talking about flower arrangements. I sat there, a ghost at my own feast, clutching a useless menu and feeling the familiar cold weight of my own invisibility. It was in that moment, watching them celebrate a future event while completely ignoring the present one I had worked 4 years to achieve, that a tiny, hard seed of something new and unfamiliar began to germinate inside me. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was anger. The turning point, the moment that seed of anger finally broke ground, was my 30th birthday. In our family, birthdays were not quiet affairs. They were productions. And for my 30th, my mother decided to host a small, intimate gathering at her house. This translated to a catered affair for 50 of her and my father's closest friends, with a string quartet in the corner and a champagne fountain. It was, In essence, my mother throwing a party for herself, with me as the flimsy excuse. I spent the evening circulating awkwardly, accepting birthday wishes from people I barely knew. Eleanor is just so proud of you, one woman told me, clutching my arm. She talks about you and Cassandra all the time. I wondered what, exactly, she said about me. That I was quiet, that I had a stable job as a research librarian. It hardly seemed like fodder for my mother's dramatic retellings. The gift opening ceremony was, as always, a public performance. I was seated in a large armchair, the birthday throne, while my mother handed me brightly wrapped packages. The gifts were a testament to how little my family actually saw me. From an aunt, a garish, neon pink cashmere sweater, a color I would never in a million years wear. From a cousin, a high-tech kitchen gadget, despite the fact that I famously hated cooking and subsisted on salads and takeout. From Cassandra, a gift certificate for a spray tan. You're looking a little bit translucent, Ellie, she said with a bright, unironic smile. A little color would do you a world of good. The final gift was from my parents. It was a large, flat box. I opened it to reveal a framed collage of family photos. But as I looked closer, my heart sank. Of the 20 or so pictures, I was only in 3, a small, blurry figure in the background. The rest were glossy, smiling portraits of Cassandra. Cassandra at her prom, Cassandra on a family vacation, Cassandra with her fiancé, Brian. In the center was a huge professional headshot of my sister from a brief, aspiring actress phase she'd gone through. My father must have seen the look on my face. He leaned in to give the final speech, a tradition in our family. He cleared his throat, tapping the microphone. To Elspeth, he began, raising his glass. 30 years old. Where does the time go? It seems like just yesterday we were celebrating her 25th. I was 29 last year, but I let it slide. We are so proud of the woman she's become. Quiet, steady, a real rock. And as we celebrate her, we also have to give a little cheer for her big sister, Cassandra, who just last week was promoted to regional manager at her firm. The crowd applauded politely. My father, caught up in the moment, spent the next 2 minutes detailing the specifics of Cassandra's promotion, her new responsibilities, the size of her corner office. He ended with, "So a toast to my girls, one in the spotlight and one holding the light. We love you both." Holding the light. The words echoed in my head. I wasn't even a background character anymore. I was a stagehand, a piece of equipment. That night, I went home to my small, quiet apartment. The ridiculous sweater was draped over a chair. The kitchen gadget sat on my counter like a chrome accusation, and the framed shrine to Cassandra was propped against the wall. I felt a lifetime of being overlooked, of being a footnote in my own life story, coalesce into a single, dense point of pressure in my chest. It was a pain so sharp and so profound it finally broke through my practiced resignation. I sat down at my simple desk, opened my laptop, and the dam of 30 years of silence finally broke. I started to write. I didn't open a diary to vent. I opened a new document to create. I took the raw material of my life, the noise, the drama, the casual dismissals, and I began to build a world. I named the mother Livia, a woman whose love was a performance. I named the sister Serafina, a radiant, all-consuming star, and the narrator, the quiet observer who saw everything. I named her Echo. I didn't know if I was writing for revenge or for clarity. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I was not just a spectator. I was the one telling the story. My life split into 2 distinct parallel streams. By day, I was Elspeth Vance, research librarian. I moved through a world of quiet stacks and hushed reading rooms, my voice a soft murmur as I helped patrons find information on obscure historical events or long-dead poets. I was good at my job. It suited my nature. I was a keeper of stories, a cataloger of facts. My colleagues knew me as reliable, quiet, and intensely private. My days were ordered, predictable, and safe. But when the sun went down, I became someone else entirely. I became A.N. Crow. The moment I got home to my apartment, I would shed the skin of Elspeth and slip into the world of my manuscript. The manuscript, which I had titled The Gilded Cage, became my obsession. It was more than a book. It was an excavation. I dug into my memories with the precision of an archaeologist, unearthing long-buried slights and forgotten hurts. I transcribed conversations almost verbatim, capturing my mother's theatrical flair, her way of turning every conversation back to herself. I painted my sister's casual self-absorption with strokes so fine and detailed that I could almost see her flicking her hair as I wrote. The school play where my line was erased became a pivotal scene in the book. But in The Gilded Cage, Echo wasn't a munchkin. She was a young ballerina who had the solo in a citywide production of The Nutcracker. Her mother, Livia, in her frantic attempt to get the perfect video of her favored daughter, Serafina, in the audience, trips and unplugs a crucial spotlight right at the peak of Echo's performance, plunging her into darkness. The humiliation was the same, but I amplified it, made it public, undeniable. The essay prize became a prestigious national fellowship. When Echo tries to tell her family, Serafina announces she's going to be on a reality television show, and the family spends the rest of the night workshopping her character for the producers. Writing these scenes was a strange and potent cocktail of agony and ecstasy. Reliving the moments was painful, but controlling them, shaping them, giving them meaning and consequence on the page, was intoxicating. I had spent my entire life as a passive recipient of their dramas. Now, I was the architect of the narrative. I decided what was important. I decided whose feelings mattered. In the world of the book, Echo's pain wasn't a footnote. It was the entire point. It was the central truth around which the universe of the story revolved. This act of creation was the most powerful thing I had ever done. It was a secret, silent roar that was building within the four walls of my small apartment. For over a year, I lived this double life. I attended the requisite family functions, sitting through Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. My silence at these events was no longer one of resignation. It was one of research. I would listen to a turn of phrase from my mother and think, "Oh, that's good." Livia would say that. Cassandra would recount some minor workplace drama with the gravity of a Shakespearean tragedy, and I would make a mental note, filing it away for Serafina. They saw me as the same old Elspeth, the quiet wallpaper. They had no idea I was a spy in their midst, gathering intelligence for a world they didn't even know existed. One particular phone call with my mother spurred me to take the next step. I had called to tell her I had adopted a cat, a small gray tabby I named Poe. It was a big deal for me. I had been lonely in my apartment, and this little creature was the first thing in a long time that felt truly mine. "Oh, a cat," my mother had said, her voice distant. "Aren't they a bit aloof? And the shedding, Elspeth. Think of the shedding." Then, without pausing, she launched into a 20-minute monologue about a minor squabble she was having with a neighbor over a hedge. When she finally wound down, she said, "Well, it was lovely catching up, dear," and hung up. She never asked the cat's name. It was such a small thing, but it was the final confirmation I needed. My reality, my small joys, were of no consequence to them. That night, I finished the final chapter of The Gilded Cage. I read it from beginning to end, my heart pounding. It was a raw, furious, and deeply sad book, but it was also true. The emotional truth of it resonated in my bones. For a week, I just looked at the file on my computer, a completed manuscript of over 100,000 words. It was my secret, my testament. But what was the point of a testament if it was never witnessed? The fear was immense. Why, what if they found out? It would be a catastrophic detonation in the middle of our family. But then a different thought crept in. What if they didn't? What if I could put this story out into the world and finally be heard, even if it was from behind a mask? The idea was terrifying and thrilling. On a whim, I researched literary agents. I picked 5, ones who seemed to represent the kind of literary fiction I had written. I drafted a query letter, my hands shaking, and then I created the pseudonym. I didn't want a fancy, made-up name. I wanted something that meant something to me, and Crow, Anonymous crow. The crow, a bird known for being a clever observer, a watcher from the sidelines. It felt right. With a deep breath and a prayer to a god I wasn't sure I believed in, I attached the manuscript and hit send on 5 emails. I closed my laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected nothing. I thought, at best, I would receive a few polite form letter rejections in a few months' time. At worst, complete silence. Either way, I had done it. I had let my story out of its cage. I was wrong. I didn't have to wait months. I had to wait less than 48 hours. The first email came from a top agent at a major New York agency. Her name was Julianne Croft. The subject line was simply, "The Gilded Cage." I opened it with trembling fingers. The email wasn't a form rejection. It was a rhapsody. "Dear Miss Crow," it began. "I started reading your manuscript yesterday evening and I did not sleep. I have not been this moved, this electrified by a debut novel in a decade. The voice is breathtakingly authentic. The emotional insight is scalpel sharp. Who are you? I must represent this book. Please, call me at your earliest convenience." I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the words until they blurred. I thought it had to be a mistake, a prank, a dream. But then another email landed, and another. By the end of the week, all 5 agents I had queried had responded, 2 of them with offers of representation already on the table. I was in a state of profound shock. I ended up signing with Julianne, who was as sharp and passionate on the phone as she had been in her email. She took the manuscript to auction, and a frantic, week-long bidding war erupted between 6 of the largest publishing houses in the country. I would get breathless updates from Julianne on my lunch breaks, hiding in a library storeroom, my head spinning. The final offer was for an advance that was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. It was utterly surreal. The 9 months leading up to publication were a blur. I worked with an editor who helped me polish and refine the manuscript, but who was adamant about preserving its raw, emotional core. "This voice is a once-in-a-generation discovery," and she told me over the phone. I opened a separate bank account under a business name to receive the advance, a secret repository for a life I wasn't yet living. Throughout it all, I maintained my cover. I went to work. I went to family dinner. I listened to Cassandra talk about her wedding plans, and my mother complain about the caterer. I was Elspeth, the quiet librarian. No one had a clue that I was secretly the most talked about debut author in the literary world. And then, the book was published, and everything exploded. The Gilded Cage did not just sell, it detonated in the culture. It was reviewed glowingly in every major publication. The New York Times called it a devastating and masterful portrait of familial narcissism. A famous actress optioned the film rights. It shot to the top of the bestseller list and stayed there. The mystery of the author's identity only fueled the fire. Who is Anne Crow? Became the literary question of the year. Speculation was rampant. Was it a famous author writing under a secret name? A ghostwriter for a celebrity finally telling their own story? My life became a study in the most profound irony. I would sit on the subway and see people reading my book, their faces creased with emotion as they read about Echo's pain. I would stand in line at a coffee shop and hear the women behind me dissecting the character of Livia. "She's a monster," one of them said, "but a recognizable one. That's what's so scary." I wanted to turn around and say, "You have no idea." My secret was both a shield and a prison. I had never felt more seen, and yet I had never been more invisible. I was Anne Crow, literary sensation. I was Elspeth Vance, quiet librarian, and I had no idea how much longer I could be both. The inevitable collision course was set by my mother, Eleanor, who considered herself a patron of the arts and a woman of impeccable taste, could not bear to be left out of a cultural phenomenon, especially one happening right in her own backyard. One Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was her. Her voice was effervescent, bubbling with excitement. "Elspeth, darling, you will never guess what the book club has chosen for this month's reading," she trilled, not waiting for an answer. Asterisk. "The Gilded Cage, asterisk, Can you believe it? We managed to get copies even with the wait list. Everyone is just dying to read it. It's book of the year. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. My throat went dry. Oh, I managed, my voice a faint squeak. Really? Yes, I've already started it. It's absolutely searing. This Anne Crow, whoever she is a genius. A bit of a bleak genius, but a genius nonetheless. It's about this terribly toxic family, just dreadful people. The mother, Livia, is a piece of work, a true narcissist. Thank God we're not like that, eh? She let out a little laugh, a sound that sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. The lack of self-awareness was so profound, so complete. It was almost a work of art in itself. You simply must come to the meeting, Elspeth, she continued, her voice insistent. It's next Thursday. Cassandra will be there, of course. With your degree in literature, you'll have such insightful things to add. We can all sit around and tear this fictional family to shreds. It will be cathartic. Cathartic. The word hung in the air between us. She had no idea. This was it. The moment I had been both dreading and on some deep subconscious level anticipating since the day I hit send. The universe wasn't just knocking on my door. It was taking a battering ram to it. I could have said no. I could have feigned a headache, a work commitment, a sudden and debilitating case of the flu. The old Elspeth would have. She would have hidden, avoided the confrontation, and watched from a safe distance. But I wasn't the old Elspeth anymore. I was Anne Crow. I had written 100,000 words of truth. The least I could do was show up for the final chapter. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'll be there. A strange, terrifying calm settled over me. The performance was set, the audience was gathered, and for the first time in my life, I knew I had the starring role. The following Thursday, I drove to my parents' house, the same house I had grown up in. The familiar streets seemed different tonight, imbued with a new and weighty significance. I felt like a general returning to an old battlefield, a place of past defeats. But this time I was armed with a secret weapon. I was wearing a simple dark blue dress, a stark contrast to the colorful, dramatic outfits my mother and sister favored. It was a conscious choice. I wanted to look like myself, Elspeth, not Echo, the victim, not Anne Crow, the mysterious author, just Elspeth, the woman who had survived them both. The living room was exactly as I remembered, and exactly as I had described it in the book. The pristine white couches, the abstract art that was chosen for its size rather than its merit, the grand piano in the corner that no one played. It was the stage. My mother's book club, a group of about 10 women who were more friends and social allies than literary critics, were gathered, sipping wine and nibbling on hors d'oeuvres. Cassandra was there, of course, holding court near the fireplace, already deep in a passionate critique. The prose is undeniably compelling, she was saying, gesturing with her wine glass. But the narrator, Echo, I found her to be insufferably passive, a classic victim mentality. I mean, at some point, you have to stop whining and learn to speak up for yourself. It's not that complicated. A few women nodded in agreement, looking at Cassandra with admiration for her sharp, unsentimental analysis. My mother greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that smelled of expensive perfume and Chardonnay. Elspeth, so glad you could make it. We're just getting into the meat of it. Find a seat, darling. She guided me to a small armchair in the corner, a seat slightly outside the main circle. My old seat, the observer's chair. I sat down, my copy of The Gilded Cage in my lap, its cover staring up at me like a silent co-conspirator. For the next hour I listened. I listened as these women, led by my mother and sister, dissected my life, my pain, my soul, all under the guise of literary criticism. It was the most surreal experience of my life. They were all talking about me, about us, and they had no idea. That mother character, Livia, is a true monster, said a woman named Carol, shaking her head. I mean, to miss her daughter's ballet solo because she was trying to get a better camera angle on her other daughter. It's just chilling. What kind of mother does that? My own mother nodded vigorously. Appalling, she declared. It's a study in malignant narcissism. The author must have known someone like that, or had a truly terrible childhood. It feels so specific. I watched my father, who was hovering by the doorway, refilling wine glasses. He had a pained look on his face. I wondered if any of it was ringing a bell for him. The school play, the camcorder, the missed line. Or had he smoothed that memory over too in the name of peace? The conversation turned to the end of the book, where Echo finally leaves her family and publishes a tell-all memoir. I found the ending a bit far-fetched, Cassandra opined, taking a delicate bite of a stuffed mushroom. A little too neat. This meek little mouse suddenly becomes a roaring lion, and the idea that writing a book could solve all her problems. It's a bit of a childish fantasy, don't you think? And so vindictive, my mother added, to air the family's dirty laundry like that, for money and fame. It's a profound act of betrayal. No matter how badly she was treated, some things should stay within the family. A profound act of betrayal. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. They were so close to the truth, yet so spectacularly, blindingly far away. They were judging Echo for the very thing I had done. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, I almost laughed out loud. This was it. This was the moment. The perfect, terrible, beautiful moment I had been waiting for. My mother, sensing a lull in the conversation, finally turned her attention to me. She gave me a patronizing, pitying smile. "Elspeth, you've been so quiet over there, just like a little mouse," she said, and the room chuckled. "What do you think of the book? You were an English major, after all. Give us your expert opinion." Every eye in the room swiveled to me. The chatter stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. For the first time in my life, in this room, I was the center of attention. The silence was absolute. I could feel my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I was not afraid. I looked from my mother's expectant face to my sister's dismissive smirk, and then I let my gaze drift over the faces of the other women. I had their complete, undivided attention. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. It was clear and steady, and it carried across the silent room with the weight of an anchor. "I think," I began, pausing to let the word hang in the air, "that it's painfully accurate." A few of the women shifted uncomfortably. Cassandra rolled her eyes, as if to say, "Here we go." "Overly sensitive, Elspeth." My mother pressed on. "Accurate in what way, dear?" "As a portrayal of a certain psychological type." "No," I said, meeting her gaze directly. I felt a surge of power, a calm certainty that was entirely new. "Accurate because I wrote it." The silence that followed was unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a physical presence, a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the air in the room. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear the frantic, sudden thumping of my mother's heart. Cassandra's jaw literally dropped, her mouth hanging open in a perfect, comical of disbelief. The wine glass she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. My mother's face went from confusion to denial to a pale, waxy white that reminded me of candle drippings. Her smile froze, then cracked. What did you say?" she stammered. To erase any doubt, to anchor the reality of the moment in a way they could not escape, I reached for a memory so specific, so private. It was like a key to a locked room in their minds. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, yet every person in the room was strained to hear it. I said I wrote it. "Remember when I was a teenager, and I wanted to apply for that summer writing program, and you told me it was a waste of time and money?" I looked directly at my mother. "You said, Elspeth, darling, you have to be realistic. Some people are born to be the audience, and some are born to be the star. You're a lovely audience." I put that line in chapter 12, word for word. It's on page 284. The blood drained completely from Eleanor's face. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her own words, spoken back to her, had become the ghosts that would haunt the room. Cassandra stared at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror and comprehension. She was finally seeing me, not as her quiet little sister, not as the family wallpaper, but as the author of the book she had just called a childish fantasy. The book club members looked back and forth between me, my mother, and my sister, their expressions a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and a dawning delicious thrill of witnessing a real-life drama far more compelling than the one they had been reading about. The gilded cage had just sprung open, and we were all trapped inside with the truth. The aftermath was not a tidy resolution, it was an implosion. The book club meeting disintegrated in a flurry of awkward apologies and hasty departures. I should be going, Carol stammered, not making eye contact with anyone as she gathered her purse. My cat sitter. The other women followed suit, murmuring excuses as they fled the scene of the car crash, leaving a trail of half-eaten canapés and shattered illusions behind them. Soon I was left alone in the living room with my family. My mother, who had sunk onto the white sofa, my sister, who was still standing by the fireplace, staring at the shards of her broken wine glass as if they held the secrets of the universe, and my father, who had finally stepped all the way into the room, his face a crumpled mess of confusion and distress. The silence stretched for a full minute before it was violently broken by my mother. Her face, which had been pale with shock, was now flushed with a deep, furious red. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "How could you do this to us, to your family? You took our private lives, our struggles, our home, and you sold it to the world for their entertainment. This is the ultimate betrayal, Elspeth. You made me a monster." Cassandra finally choked out, her voice trembling with rage. She finally looked at me, her eyes blazing. "That character, Serafina, she's a caricature, a narcissistic, cruel monster. That is not who I am. You twisted everything, took every little thing out of context to make yourself look like a poor, innocent victim." My father wrung his hands, stepping forward as if to mediate, his lifelong habit. "Now girls, let's not. I'm sure Elspeth didn't mean for it to be malicious. Did you, Ellie? It was just a story, right?" I listened to their accusations, their justifications, their desperate attempts to reframe the narrative back into something they could control. The old me would have shrunk under the force of their anger. She would have apologized, tried to explain, tried to make them feel better. But the old me had written a book, and in doing so, had written herself out of existence. I stood up from my armchair, feeling a strange and powerful calm. I was no longer an actor in their play. I was the playwright, and the show was over. "It's not a caricature, Cassandra," I said, my voice even. "It's how you made me feel. It's the role you assigned me." I turned to my mother. "And it's not a betrayal to tell your own story, Mom. My life, my feelings, my experiences, they are not your dirty laundry. They are mine. I wrote what I lived. I wrote the truth of my life as the perpetual audience to yours. The details were fictionalized to protect you, but the feelings were real. Every lonely dinner, every overlooked achievement, every moment I was made to feel invisible in this very room, that was all real. And now," I paused, looking at each of them in turn, "it's your truth to sit with too." I picked up my purse and my coat. For the first time, I didn't wait for a dismissal. I didn't look for a sign of approval or understanding. I walked to the front door, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own making. As I opened the door, I heard my father call out my name, his voice weak and pleading. "Elspeth, wait." I paused for a moment, but I didn't turn around. I just walked out into the cool night air and closed the door behind me, the click of the latch sounding like the most definitive full stop I had ever written. In the days that followed, my phone became a war zone. The first wave was angry texts from Cassandra, long, rambling messages accusing me of being jealous, cruel, and mentally unstable. Then came the voicemails from my mother. They were masterpieces of emotional manipulation, veering wildly from wounded sorrow. "Day, when you could see me as that horrible woman Livia, I gave you everything," to outright guilt-tripping. "Day, your father is beside himself. His health isn't good, you know. This shock could be very bad for him." My father's attempts were quieter, but just as potent. A single text message that read, "Your mother isn't eating. Please call us." "We need to talk as a family." I did not answer. It wasn't a punishment. It was a necessity. I needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with their expectations and their drama. I needed to exist, for a little while, purely as myself. I called the one person who knew both my identities, my agent, Julianne. I told her everything. She was silent for a moment, and then she let out a low whistle. "Well, Crow," she said, her voice a mix of awe and concern. "You certainly know how to create a third-act twist." She was fiercely protective. She had her assistant field all press inquiries and advised me to keep my head down. "When you're ready," she said, "we will tell the world who you are, on your terms, not theirs." A week after the book club detonation, I felt ready. The silence had allowed me to solidify my resolve. I wasn't going to be drawn back into their chaotic orbit on their terms. I sent a group text to my parents and Cassandra. "I will meet you for coffee. Saturday, 10 a.m. The Grind. It's a public place. We will talk." It was not a request. It was a summons. The power dynamic had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. I was no longer asking for a seat at their table. I was inviting them to mine. When I walked into the coffee shop on Saturday morning, I saw them huddled at a small table in the corner. They looked diminished, stripped of the backdrop of their home. Under the neutral fluorescent lighting of a public cafe, they seemed smaller, older, and deeply uncomfortable. My mother wasn't wearing her usual vibrant colors. She was in a drab beige cardigan. Cassandra wasn't staring at her phone. She was anxiously shredding a paper napkin into a small snowy pile. They had clearly reread the book. This time they hadn't been reading about a fictional family. They had been reading about themselves. I sat down and ordered a black coffee. For a few moments no one spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken things. Finally, it was my mother who broke it, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "We read the book again," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. Cassandra looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, the words sounding foreign and stiff in her mouth. "I'm sorry if you felt that I overshadowed you sometimes." It was a classic non-apology. The "I'm sorry you felt that way" that places the blame back on the person who was hurt. The old Elspeth would have accepted it, grateful for even the smallest crumb of remorse. But the new Elspeth was not starving anymore. "It's not about how I felt, Cass," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's about what happened. It's not about sometimes. It was the fundamental dynamic of our entire lives. And it wasn't just you. It was all of us." I looked at my mother and father. "You were the director, Mom. You were the stage manager, Dad. And I was the audience. And I am finished with that role." I laid out my terms, not as a list of demands, but as a statement of fact. Our relationship, if it was going to exist at all, had to be rebuilt on a new foundation, one of respect, one where my life was not a subplot to theirs, one where I was seen and heard, not just as a quiet observer, but as a person with her own story, her own triumphs, and her own pain. There were no tears, no dramatic hugs of reconciliation. It was a fragile, terrifying, and uncertain truce. It wasn't a happy ending, but for the first time it felt like a real beginning. 3 months later, the world officially met in Crow. I agreed to a single televised interview with a respected journalist known for her insightful, compassionate style. As I walked onto the brightly lit set, I felt a tremor of the old fear, the wallflower's instinct to retreat into the shadows. But then I sat down, and the cameras turned on, and I felt a profound sense of calm. I was not there as a victim seeking pity or a firebrand seeking revenge. I was there as a storyteller, and this was simply the next chapter. I told my story. I talked about growing up feeling invisible, about the catharsis of writing, about the shock of success. I spoke about my family, not with malice, but with a kind of sad clarity. "I love my family," I said, looking directly into the camera. "But for a long time, I think we were all cast in the wrong roles." The book was my way of holding a mirror up to all of us, not to shame us, but to show us what we had become. The interview was a sensation. The public's fascination with The Gilded Cage and its mysterious author transformed into a deeper conversation about family dynamics, emotional neglect, and the power of finding one's voice. Sales of the book surged again, but I found that the money and the fame were secondary. The true reward was the flood of messages I received from people all over the world, people who had been the quiet one, the audience, the echo in their own families. They wrote to me and said, "Thank you. You told my story, too." My relationship with my family is still a work in progress. It is not, and will never be, the easy, uncomplicated bond that other families seem to have. There are still moments of awkwardness, times when they slip back into old patterns. But now, I have the voice to call it out. The difference is that now, when I speak, they listen. My mother tries, in her own clumsy, theatrical way, to show interest in my life. My sister sometimes calls me for advice. My father and I have taken to having quiet lunches, just the two of us, where he is slowly, painstakingly learning to ask questions and actually hear the answers. It is a fragile piece, but it is an honest one. My name is Elspeth Vance. For 30 years I was defined by my silence, but I learned that silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. Sometimes, it just means you're waiting, observing, and gathering the words for the story that only you can tell. I wrote a book not to get revenge, but to get seen. And in the process, I found something far more valuable than fame or fortune. I found my own voice, and I learned that my worth was never determined by whether or not I was in the spotlight. It was there all along, in the quiet observation, in the deep well of feeling, in the courage to finally write my own name on the cover of my own life. The greatest lesson I learned is that you are the narrator of your own story. You get to decide who the main characters are, what plot twists matter, and how the story ends. Don't ever let anyone else hold the pen. If you've ever felt unseen or had your voice silenced, I want you to know you're not alone. I'd be honored if you shared a piece of your own story in the comments below. Let's make this a space where every voice is heard. Please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your strength and speaking your truth. Thank you so much for joining me today and for listening. Remember, sometimes the quietest people have the most powerful stories to tell. I wish you all the strength to tell yours.